Welcome to the Federal Aviation Administration's or FAA's virtual public workshop on departure procedure modifications for the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. We're glad you can join us for this virtual meeting. My name is Eric Amond, and I'm the Regional Administrator for the FAA's Great Lakes region. I will be your moderator for today's meeting. This session will be recorded and will be available on the FAA's YouTube channel. So let's dive in. Our agenda today will start with a discussion on the flight procedure design process and our collaboration with local communities. This will be followed by an airport operational video and a video on performance-based navigation and area navigation, also known as RNAV. Then we will share a detailed presentation of the proposed departure procedures. After, our panel of experts will host a live Q&A session and we'll respond to your questions submitted on Zoom or on YouTube. The purpose of this meeting is to inform the public about the proposed modifications to the Standard Instrument Departures, also known as SIDs, at the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. These modified SIDs will use a technology called area navigation, or RNAV. Using these modified SIDs requires the FAA to transition from ground-based navigational aids to satellite-based navigational aids. These modifications are designed to enhance safety and efficiency, reduce fuel consumption, and minimize flight delays while maintaining the departure dispersion over communities in the vicinity of the airport. Next, I will give you an overview on the process used to develop the flight procedures. The design of the flight procedures is regulated by federal law and address technical requirements such as minimum altitudes, turning radius, and emergency operations. Stringent reviews by various FAA organizations cover safety, environmental, and air traffic considerations. The process the FAA used to design and then review the proposed flight procedures for Minneapolis-St. Paul is the same process the FAA uses for similar projects nationwide. It is important for the FAA to work collaboratively with aviation stakeholders while developing new procedures. The stakeholders we have worked with on this project include the airlines, the Noise Oversight Committee, or NOC, and the Metropolitan Airports Commission, or MAC. Through the MAC, the FAA worked with the NOC. The NOC provided several initial recommendations on the design of the departure procedures. The following initial recommendations were included by the FAA in the proposed procedures. Number 1, use multiple departure headings to provide departure fanning. Number 2, use compatible corridors such as the Minnesota River and the Egan-Mendota corridor. And number 3, design procedures that concentrate some departures to the south for noise abatement purposes. I will now hand off the presentation to Christy Rigotti, our Environmental Protection Specialist, to talk about the environmental study process. Christy, over to you.
Hello, I'm Christy Rigotti, and I'm an Environmental Protection Specialist at the FAA. Per federal guidance in the National Environmental Policy Act, referred to as NEPA, the FAA is required to evaluate categories of potential environmental, social, and economic effects of a proposed federal action. According to NEPA, the proposed procedure changes are a proposed federal action. The environmental level of review for this action has not yet been determined. In order to determine the appropriate level of environmental review, we must first look at the potential environmental impacts and any possible extraordinary circumstances. Once these decisions have been made, the environmental process will continue following FAA and NEPA requirements.
In addition to answering your questions live today, public comments will be accepted until September 15th, 2024. You may send your written comments to the email address or physical mailing address shown on the screen, or you may simply scan the QR code shown on the screen with your mobile device. Next, we will share an airport operational video, followed by a more detailed look at RNAV. Then our air traffic experts will present the proposed departure procedures. I'll join you again shortly for our moderated live Q&A session.
This video provides an overview of operations in and around the airspace at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, or MSP. Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport is an important connection to the world. It is consistently ranked in the top 30 airports in the country and is expected to grow in the coming years. The airport is an economic driver for the region, supporting nearly 87,000 jobs and nearly $16 billion in business revenue. In order to help it continue to thrive, it must continue to connect with markets worldwide. Technology is always updating, and the FAA is updating the technology that drives air traffic control. These updates enhance safety and improve efficiency of the airspace, benefits for the traveling public. Modernization can reduce delays while meeting current and projected demand. At MSP, a ground-based navigational aid, known as the VOR, will be decommissioned soon. VOR technology dates back to the 1950s. In its place, we will use satellite-based performance-based navigation, or PBN, to update standard instrument departure procedures. As part of this current modernization process at MSP, the FAA has been working closely with the Metropolitan Airports Commission, also known as the MAC. In addition, the FAA, through the MAC, has worked closely with the Airports Noise Roundtable, also known as the Noise Oversight Committee, or NOC. We're also working with the airlines, air traffic controllers, and other stakeholders to ensure community and user voices are heard. Our goal is to bring MSP up to the safety and efficiency standards seen at other airports nationwide, while considering community input in the process. So, how did we get here? When an airport is designed, the runways are laid out to align with the most common wind directions. This is because aircraft generally take off and land into the wind. In Minneapolis, winds can come from all directions. The runways at MSP reflect those varying wind conditions. As shown in this animation, MSP has 4 runways. Each runway end is treated separately, which means there are actually 8 surfaces. Runway identification is based on the magnetic compass heading the aircraft is facing as it lands or takes off. For example, runway 1230 has a compass heading of approximately 120 degrees in one direction and 300 degrees in the opposite direction. If you drop the 0 at the end of the compass heading, you will get 12 and 30. Parallel runways are further designated with L for left or R for right as you approach or depart the runway. This example shows aircraft in north flow. When winds are from the north, landing and departing on runway 30 left and 30 right. The other primary operational flows include south flow, when winds are from the south, and mixed A, which includes aircraft arriving and departing to the north, as well as departing to the southwest. Changes in weather mean there could be multiple operational flows in one day. Changes can also occur if the airport closes a runway for construction or snow removal. Air traffic controllers use 3-dimensional space to keep planes safely separated. Satellite-based procedures make that job safer and more efficient because the separation requirements can be incorporated into the procedure, enhancing safety and reducing pilot-controller readback errors. Creating and publishing new flight procedures is a multi-step process that involves multiple workgroup meetings with all stakeholders. We look at air traffic patterns in the area and make sure that any new procedures do not put that traffic at risk. The proposed satellite-based updates allow us to ensure aircraft from Minneapolis-St. Paul and surrounding Twin City airports are safely separated while maintaining a flow of air traffic into and out of the Twin Cities area. The MAC and the NOC have given the FAA valuable feedback during this process. We'll discuss that feedback later in this workshop. We hope this video gives you a basic understanding of how airports are designed, how the air traffic control system works in the Twin Cities airspace, and how planned technology upgrades will enhance safety and make the airport more efficient. For more information, please visit the Minneapolis page on the FAA's Community Engagement website. This video provides an overview of changes taking place to modernize and transform the U.S. national airspace system. We will talk about satellite-based navigation and how this technology is improving the nation's airspace. Satellite-based technology enables the FAA to improve safety and system efficiency, reduce delays, and provide a better experience for travelers. One aspect of satellite-based navigation is called PBN, or Performance-Based Navigation. Traditionally, pilots have flown point-to-point using ground-based navigational aids. These ground-based systems are old, inefficient, and expensive to maintain. Congress has mandated the FAA use performance-based navigation at airports nationwide. PBN includes area navigation, or RNAV, otherwise known as RNAV, and required navigation performance, or RNP. This video will focus on RNAV. Ground-based navigation using very high omnidirectional range navigation, known as VOR, has been in place for over 70 years. But much like technology in our everyday lives, it is being updated and replaced by a system that is more efficient. Performance-based navigation offers the most direct route between any 2 points, much like what you use when you take advantage of your car's GPS. Through the FAA Modernization and Reform Act of 2012, Congress directed the FAA to use PBN throughout the national airspace system. As a result, many of the old ground-based navigational aids are no longer needed, being decommissioned. As these procedures are developed, the FAA is taking care to recognize community needs. All satellite-based procedures, including RNAV and PBN, are developed specific to an individual airport, recognizing its unique environment, including land use and the residents who live nearby. Every effort is made to route aircraft over non-residential areas, including highways and open land, whenever it can be done safely. RNAV procedures can be used in the departure, en route, and arrival phases of flight. These procedures reduce delays and possible communication readback errors between pilots and controllers. When a plane leaves an airport, RNAV Standard Instrument Departure Procedures, or SIDS, follow a published route to provide a precise, predictable path for the climbing aircraft. Standard Terminal Arrival Procedures, or STARS, do the same for arriving aircraft. All procedures are published on flight charts. When aircraft are equipped with GPS or Flight Management Systems, or FMS, this guidance is programmed in, providing direction to the pilot at every step of the flight, reducing potential for distraction, and reducing potential pilot-controller readback errors. The FMS gives the pilot a predetermined departure path, or heading, altitude, and frequency for communications during each phase of flights. They can follow a heading or a vector that will disperse aircraft paths over a specific point. RNAV SIDS that use these type of headings are called vector RNAV SIDS. These procedures are developed with much study and care. The airport, airlines, FAA, and air traffic control join together to look at the airspace, the airport, and community needs, and other factors to determine what type of RNAV SIDS will be developed at a specific airport. PBN and ARNAV, including SIDS, STARS, and other types of satellite-based navigation, improve safety by ensuring safe separation between aircraft. These procedures improve the safe, efficient movement of air traffic through the nation's airspace by providing more predictable flight paths, eliminating the potential for errors in pilot-controller readback. Please see our other YouTube videos for more information about how national airspace improvement is enhancing safety for all travelers.
Hello, my name is Robin Lohndorf, and I am a Supervisory Air Traffic Control Specialist at Minneapolis Terminal Radar Approach Control, also known as the TRACON. I have been actively involved in air traffic for 23 years and here at Minneapolis since 2011. We will walk you through the flight procedure poster boards for the proposed departure procedures here at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. Each of the following boards shows proposed departure procedures along with actual flight tracks. The flight tracks and procedures are all overlaid on a map of the surrounding area. Each flight procedure board is oriented with north facing up. The name of each flight procedure is shown by an arrow on the map containing a 5-letter name. For example, this board shows departures. These are called SIDs, or Standard Instrument Departures. The spelling of each departure procedure is limited to 5 letters. For example, the spelling of the NRTHN departure is pronounced northern. The diamonds on the board are locations of waypoints, which are fixed navigational points in space that are part of the published procedure. Just as with the spelling of procedures, waypoints are spelled with 5 letters. For example, the SLUSH waypoint would be pronounced slush. The proposed flight procedure arrows are colored purple for departures. These arrows show the general area of the proposed flight procedures. Surrounding the arrows are dispersed path areas in pink. These areas show the possible locations where aircraft may fly and also account for different routing to avoid hazardous weather, for our operational needs, for safety, or to disperse the departures. When aircraft fly in these areas, it is typically due to a pilot receiving a compass heading from air traffic control. We call them vectors. A vector is a compass heading assigned to an aircraft by an air traffic controller at Minneapolis Terminal Radar Approach Control, also known as the TRACON, or the airport tower. The bullet points on the right side of each of these boards provide additional details about the procedures. This board shows an overview of the existing aircraft activity in the greater Minneapolis area, including airports near Minneapolis. These airports include Anoka County, Crystal, Flying Cloud, and St. Paul downtown. As this board shows, the Minneapolis airspace is busy and is home to both commercial and general aviation operations. These general aviation operations may be small propeller airplanes that are training to become pilots, or airplanes flying for survey work. We call them photo flights. Business jet traveling between St. Paul and Flying Cloud and beyond. Law enforcement or medical transport aircraft, or even aircraft sightseeing over the Minneapolis and St. Paul downtown areas. The airports shown here each have their own airspace outlined in light blue, and aircraft flying to and from these airports communicate with air traffic controllers while in this airspace. In close proximity to these satellite airports is Minneapolis, with its airspace and flight tracks shown in dark blue. This series of 4 boards shows departures in north flow, which is aircraft departing to the north on runways 30 right and 30 left. North flow is used when winds come from the north. It is used more than the south flow here due to our typical wind patterns. These boards show the existing flight tracks in purple with the dispersion areas in pink. All aircraft are flying on a published departure procedure, or SID. These SIDs guide aircraft out of the Minneapolis area to join the en route airspace and ultimately head to their destination. This board provides a view of the broader metropolitan area. Following this board are more zoomed in boards providing additional details. When aircraft depart, they are assigned an initial heading by air traffic control. Aircraft fly this initial heading, which is typically in the general direction of their destination. A good example of aircraft being given initial headings to join a procedure is for aircraft flying to the northeast. Here, aircraft are given a heading that guides them to the Pike waypoint by following the northern SID. These aircraft continue on to destinations such as Boston, Syracuse, and Amsterdam. This board shows a more zoomed-in view of the existing flight tracks and proposed departure procedures. These are the same flight tracks and proposed procedures as the previous board, but zoomed in on the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. Air traffic normally assigns a departure procedure based on the most efficient route to the aircraft's destination. The proposed departure procedures are designed to replicate the current procedures as close as possible, including aircraft dispersed on initial headings. This board shows a close-in version of proposed north flow departure procedures and flight tracks. At this level of detail, you can see the multiple departure procedures labeled with arrows. Also detailed are the set of waypoints located approximately 7 miles from the airport. While these waypoints are part of the procedure, aircraft do not always fly to those waypoints before turning. Air traffic control will turn an aircraft on course before reaching these waypoints when it is safe to do so. This also allows our facility to be efficient, thereby reducing delays. The design of the proposed procedures will allow us to mimic how aircraft depart Minneapolis today, providing dispersion of flight tracks while maintaining the highest level of safety. This board is identical to the previous one, but now the flight tracks are colored by altitude. As you can see, by the time aircraft reach approximately 7 miles from the airport, they are generally at altitudes between 4,000 and 6,000 feet. The proposed flight procedures will ensure aircraft climb to specified minimum altitudes at each waypoint. These are also shown on the board. This ensures safety by keeping those departing aircraft above the airspace below, which is used by other airports.
Hi, my name is Matt D'Antonio, and I'm an air traffic control specialist and NACA training representative at the Minneapolis Terminal Radar Approach Control, or TRACON. I've been actively involved in air traffic control for over 16 years, and 12 of those years have been in Minneapolis. This next series of 4 boards shows departures in south flow, which aircraft is departing to the south on runway 12 right, runway 12 left, and runway 17. We will show a couple of zoomed out views followed by zoomed in views showing the detailed areas near Minneapolis. South flow is used when winds come from the south. It is used less than north flow due to our typical wind patterns. Just like north flow, aircraft are assigned a departure procedure by air traffic control to join a published route towards their destination. Today, when aircraft depart runway 17, they will turn to follow the Minnesota River, flying over less populated areas. When this procedure is followed, it ensures aircraft will climb to a safe altitude above bird activity over the river, as well as keep noise levels to a minimum over populated areas. These future procedures over the river will be more precise, keeping aircraft noise further away from populated areas while increasing climb rates. Part of the new proposed departure procedure designs in South Flow was intended to deconflict with arrivals and departures. This means that the proposed departure procedures will be separated from arrivals, reducing pilot-controller communications and enhancing safety, which is always our top priority. This board shows a more zoomed-in view of the existing flight tracks and proposed departure procedures. Aircraft are assigned an initial departure procedure based on the aircraft destination, operational need, and sequencing of aircraft to maintain required separation. Air traffic control normally assigns a departure procedure based on the most efficient route to the aircraft's destination. The proposed procedures were designed to give air traffic controllers the flexibility to manage air traffic for safety and efficiency, which inherently increases noise dispersion. This dispersion will allow noise levels to be more spread out to ensure minimal impact to populated areas. We also have incorporated the use of the Egan-Mendota Heights corridor, which maintains the existing noise abatement procedures. This board shows a close-in version of proposed south flow departure procedures and existing flight tracks. This board details the multiple departure procedures and waypoints located approximately 7 miles from the airport. While these waypoints are part of the procedure, as you can see, some aircraft are turned towards their destination before reaching these waypoints. This will increase the amount of dispersion of aircraft, which minimizes impact to surrounding communities regarding noise. The design of the proposed procedures will allow us to mimic how aircraft depart Minneapolis today, providing dispersion of flight tracks while maintaining the highest level of safety at all times. For aircraft flying to the southwest, the proposed procedures include following the Minnesota River for noise abatement procedures. Again, with our new proposed procedures, the aircraft will be flying a very specific route over the river while continuing to climb, which will then decrease the effect of noise over populated areas. This is the same as the previous board, but now the tracks are colored by altitude. As you can see, by the time aircraft reach approximately 7 miles from the airport, they are generally at altitudes at or above 4,000 feet. As of today, we do not have such climb restrictions. With our new proposed departure procedures, this will ensure aircraft are climbing faster, thereby decreasing the effect of noise over populated areas. These final 3 boards show what we call the mixed A operations, which is when aircraft depart to the north on runway 30 right, runway 30 left, and also depart on runway 17, while aircraft arrive on runway 30 right and runway 30 left. These boards show the existing flight tracks in purple, with the dispersion areas in pink for departures and arriving flight tracks in orange and dispersion areas in yellow. All aircraft are flying on a published departure procedure or an arrival procedure called the Standard Terminal Arrival Route, or STAR. These departure procedures and STARs guide aircraft in and out of the Minneapolis area to and from the en route airspace. This board shows the same flight tracks zoomed in to show how the arrival and departure tracks intersect, but use altitude separation of 1,000 feet or more to have positive separation at all times. Air traffic control assigns an aircraft departure procedure in mixed A, just as they do for north and south flow, dispersing aircraft and turning them towards their destinations when safe to do so. In this flow, currently aircraft arriving to Minneapolis are stepped down as they arrive, like walking down a set of stairs, while stopping on certain stairs or altitudes. The new proposed procedures will now allow these arrivals to descend on idle power without stepping down, similar to gliding in a continuous descent instead of leveling off and then descending. This change will allow aircraft to decrease fuel use as well as increase safety of flow of aircraft in and out of Minneapolis. We will continue to turn aircraft on course when it is safe to do so. This also allows our facility to be as efficient as possible, reducing delays. This board shows a zoomed-in view of the existing flight tracks and proposed departure procedures. This detailed view shows the areas located near the Minneapolis airport. Of note, aircraft will continue to use the Egan-Mendota Heights corridor to land. The design of the proposed departure procedures will allow us to mimic how aircraft depart Minneapolis today while providing dispersion of flight tracks while maintaining the highest level of safety. Our air traffic team has worked directly with the Metropolitan Airports Commission Noise Oversight Committee to ensure our new proposed departure procedures meet or exceed goals of keeping noise levels of the surrounding communities to a minimum. We have also worked with our airlines based at Minneapolis, including Delta, to ensure all procedures are safe and efficient. Our goal is to mimic the current procedures of today, while adding dispersion and altitude restrictions to increase climb rates close to the airport, which will decrease noise levels on the ground. We hope this presentation of the flight procedure boards was helpful. Up next, there will be a live question and answer session. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Amund. and I'm the regional administrator for the FAA's Great Lakes region that spans the 8 states between the Dakotas and Ohio. Thank you for participating in our virtual public workshop. I will be your moderator for this discussion, and I look forward to hearing your questions about our proposal. You may submit your questions at any time during today's session by entering them into the Q&A section in Zoom, or if you're watching us on YouTube, you may enter your questions into the YouTube chat. Please note the questions you submit today during the Q&A session are not the same as submitting a formal written comment to the FAA. To clarify, there are 2 ways to interact with us. Number 1, submit questions during today's session. And number 2, submit formal written comments separately. I'll talk about exactly how to submit these formal written comments about the project at the end of the workshop. Before we get started with the questions and the answers, I'd like to cover a few procedural items. First, if you're having any technical issues connecting to the workshop, you may text our tech support number anytime during the workshop. The number to text is 949-478-0253. Again, that's 949-478-0253. This Q&A session will last for 60 minutes. We have 2 workshops scheduled, one today and one tomorrow. So if you'd like, you may attend both sessions. And as I mentioned, we are live streaming on the FAA's YouTube channel. A recording of this workshop will be available on YouTube immediately after the broadcast. Helping me out today, we have a group of subject matter experts. Let me introduce our panelists. First, we have Sean Fortier, FAA's MSP District Traffic Manager Officer. Hello, Sean. We've got Robin Lohendorf, Operations Supervisor, MSP Terminal Radar Approach Control. Good afternoon, Robin. We've got Matt D'Antonio, Air Traffic Controller, MSP Terminal Radar Approach Control. Howdy, Matt. We've got Brian Shield, Operations Manager from MSP Air Traffic Control Tower. Christy Rigotti, Environmental Protection Specialist. Welcome, Christy. Michelle Ross, Manager Community Relations for the Metropolitan Airports Commission, or MAC. Good afternoon, Michelle. And last but not least, Captain Clifton Sato, Technical Pilot, Delta Airlines. Thanks for joining us, Captain. We appreciate it. We're very excited to discuss with all of you some of the work we're proposing at Minneapolis and then answer your questions. Everyone you see on this meeting today is committed to continue this meaningful dialogue with communities, and we're here to answer your questions about the proposed flight procedures. And as I mentioned earlier, the FAA will be collecting comments on this proposal, so we encourage you to join in the conversation. Also, as mentioned earlier, there are 2 ways to interact with us today: submitting a question during the live Q&A session and/or submitting a formal written comment. Formal written comments may be submitted until September 15th, 2024. How do you submit a formal written comment? It's a great question. Later in the presentation, we'll put some information on the screen that tells you exactly how and where to submit your comments. So let's get into it and get to your questions. So before we take some questions from our participants, I'd like to ask our panel a couple of questions just to set the ground and to give some foundational information. First, I want to ask our air traffic controllers and our pilots to explain some of the information from the opening video. It illustrated what a complex environment in Minneapolis around the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. It shows the amount of operations in the satellite airspace. Can you talk us through the coordination process of the local tower, Terminal Radar Approach Control Facility, or TRACON, and the Air Route Traffic Control Center, the center, and how they all work together here? So this is 3 different elements that all work together and coordinate all of this activity. So let me go over to Sean first, and then maybe Matt and Brian, if you guys can weigh in. And then I'd like Cliff to weigh in as well, from a Delta's perspective. So Sean, over to you.
Thank you, Eric. As far as keeping aircraft separated, we each have a role to play. You identified the different facilities. And so what I'd like to do is really demonstrate what a flight would be like from start to finish from the professionals that you'd work with at each of the facilities. And so Brian Shield, if you want to just start us out with the tower, and we'll just transition through this description.
Yeah, sure, Sean. So the first thing that happens in your flight, once you're on the airplane, is we'll give the aircraft clearance to push back from the terminal. And that's when you guys finally start moving. We'll give taxi instructions or directions for them to move on the ground to get them to the appropriate runway for their direction of flight. And then from that point, we'll find a spot for that departure in the mix of other aircraft that are using that runway, and we'll put them on the runway and give them a departure clearance. After the departure clearance, we'll issue a heading to that aircraft to provide separation between the other departures and other airspace boundaries that are in our area. And once we have that positive separation established for you, that's where we hand you over to the TRACON. So I'll turn it over to Matt and let him talk about what happens next.
Thanks, Brian. Yes, as the plane is departing Minneapolis, most planes climb to 7,000 feet, and our arrivals are descending to 8,000 feet. So it is up to us to get those departures on course as soon as we can and at a safe altitude to transfer to the Minneapolis Center, who then climbs their planes to the flight levels as cruise flight exists. And then as we get to the center environment, that's where Sean will take over and explain some of the center.
Thanks, Matt. So typically you'll spend about 90% of your flight with controllers in the air route traffic control center. They'll take you around constraints such as thunderstorms or other issues within the national airspace system. And then as you begin your descent, you'll transition back to a terminal radar approach control. And I'll let Matt talk about what that is like.
Yep, so as we get the aircraft from the center environment, they're descending what we call optimum profile descent. And that's basically descending at an idle power setting to increase fuel use. And so as they're coming into the Minneapolis airport, it's our goal to separate those aircraft from other airplanes that are landing the parallel runways specifically. And so we have them join 1,000 feet or more, or 3 miles or more for the most part, to have them land Minneapolis airport. And then as they get to a certain point, we then give them to the tower, and the tower will eventually clear them to land and get them to their gate safely.
Captain Sato, would you like to add some additional comments to what our air traffic control folks have said?
Absolutely. So from, our pilots in the flight deck, when we're preparing for a flight and getting ready to interact with all these different agencies, our typical flight plan and preparation starts about an hour before the flight. And at this point, we're receiving kind of like initial game plan, what we should expect from the beginning of the flight, which includes takeoff, all the way to the end of the flight, landing in our destination. That game plan that begins the flight is merely just the plan which we start with and eventually deviate from when we start getting vectors or manual headings from controllers while we're airborne. So, you could think of this as two different ways of being controlled. We could either be controlled by procedure, by being assigned some type of departure or arrival or jet route in between two different places, or manually if air traffic control gives us some type of heading specific for us to fly. So, in terms of setting the stage for what we'll talk about probably in the future of this meeting today, there's multiple ways for us to be controlled, and what we have at the beginning of the flight is a going in game plan of what to expect from beginning to end.
So, Sean, what's the key takeaway for our audience today? There's a lot of coordination between the FAA and the airlines. And there's a lot of coordination within the FAA for different functions within air traffic control. I mean, this is the stuff we sort of take for granted when we get on an airplane and we just expect that the airplane is going to get from our origination to our destination. But there's a lot of coordination in between, right?
No, absolutely, Eric. I think you put that well. It's a very complex system. There are a lot of moving parts, and there are a lot of players involved. But everybody has a part to play. They all have a role in making the operation safe, and a big part of that safety is predicated on predictability and having a standard operating procedure. And so our goal throughout this process is to emulate that through these procedures in order to maintain that safe and efficient flow of aircraft.
I like how you sum that up. And let's be clear, the primary driver here is always safety. I think, nearly all of you use that word at some point in your answer. So that's still going to be our North Star, as we say, about guiding our decisions on how we set up procedures. All right, let's pivot to another question. I want to ask about the actual proposed procedures. In the videos, we talked about RNAV, or area navigation, and what it is. We had that great video with some of the animations. I'd like to ask our air traffic and airline panelists, how will you use this technology in MSP? And how will it provide the safety and efficiency talked about in the video? So let's go to Brian, and then Robin, and then maybe we'll finish up with Cliff as well.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So I think the biggest change for us from the tower environment is going to be how we communicate that heading off of the departure end that I was just talking about. We're going to be able to give that information with the clearance, which is the thing that happens 30 minutes before the airplane starts moving. So the pilot's going to have that expectation of not just their big picture route of flight, but what we're going to do with them in the close-in environment to the airport. So they can plan for that. The other thing where this helps is with the frequency congestion, because now they have that, we're not having to tell them to fly a heading. And that's a pretty big piece of safety right there. Anytime, so I guess we should talk about frequency. The frequency is like a telephone with everybody on the airport talking on the same line. So anytime that we can do something electronically to communicate that and reduce the amount of times that we have to say something to a pilot, and then they have to repeat it back to us, and then we have to verify that what they repeated back to us is what we told them. So there's a lot of steps there for us. Anytime we can do that electronically, which would be similar to me sending you a text message, they have that to read it. And if they need to check it again, it's right there in front of them. They don't have to talk to us on a frequency. And that leaves us the opportunity to do other things that we need to with the frequency and talk to pilots. So I'll turn it over to Matt or Robin, and they can kind of let you know how this will affect them in the TRACON environment.
Thanks, Brian. Like Brian was saying, RNAV, it's just a more modern way to use our airspace. We're able to take those GPS fixes and overlay some of our current flight paths that we have, and even make a more accurate route over the river off of Runway 17. And as far as safety goes, if, for example, we were to lose communication with a pilot, we would know exactly where they will go and what altitude they will be at for their route of flight.
All right, Captain Sato, so what does this mean from Delta's perspective, or just from a general airline perspective, the use of RNAV?
Specifically, use of RNAV in terms of how we prepare the aircraft and our interaction with ATC. Much like they said earlier, we receive our clearances about 30 minutes prior to us departing from the gate. What that does is it allows us the time to make sure that the flight path that we have programmed into our FMS, which is the calculator or computer on the aircraft, is showing what we're expected to do. Now, as far as how we receive those clearances today in most major airports and at Minneapolis, those clearances come to us over a data link. So there's really no radio communications that we need to do when we get that clearance. Now, a difference between this and what we're doing today in Minneapolis is we're receiving essentially our clearance at the very last moment, which is when we take the runway. And that clearance is a heading and an altitude. So, I can speak about it further if there's interest, but that moment where we take the runway is probably one of the most high workload environments of the flight. So if we can reduce the amount of communications and increase the amount of certainty of what we're going to do as we take the runway, that'll certainly be an increase of safety and something that we prefer as an airline.
No, I think that was a great summary. I heard some common themes here. And first, Brian, I really liked what you said about the frequency and like everybody on the telephone line all at once, right? So using these RNAV procedures does a couple of key things. And I think it's important for the audience to know. It really helps the airlines plan. It helps the FAA plan. And in addition to that, it helps to avoid or eliminate or reduce readback errors between controllers and pilots, which I think is, again, back to that key thing of safety in everyone's interests. All right. I want to ask Sean and Michelle about preferred runway use at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, or MSP. How does the FAA implement this? How does the airport and the FAA communicate on the usage of preferred runways? Sean, why don't you take a first crack at it?
Absolutely, Eric. So the runway use system is basically a determination of how we will try to direct aircraft over compatible land. And so that would be land such as industrial parks or the river valley here in Minneapolis. Realistically, we need to understand, and I know it was covered earlier, that aircraft have to land and depart into the wind. But we do have some scenarios and weather conditions where we have calm winds, and then we're able to take advantage of the fact that we do have compatible land use areas out there. And in those cases, we would direct flights in that direction. But I'll turn it over to Michelle for any additional comments.
Thank you. The runway use system is just one of the best practices that's in place at MSP that helps to reduce noise as possible. The MAC and the Noise Oversight Committee did request that the FAA consider all of these existing best practices when developing the updated procedures that we're talking about today. And our understanding is that the changes in the procedures will not impact how the runway use system is implemented or how aircraft are assigned runways. And I'll offer too that there's more information about all of MSP's noise abatement at metroairports.org/community.
So Sean, let's wrap this up for the audience. The preferred runways that we're using today, does this continue under the new RNAV procedures?
Absolutely, Eric. No change to the runway use system as a result of this new project at all.
All right, so let's dig into this just a little bit and Michelle, I'm going to take us in a little bit of a different direction. So there's a little bit of a change right now at the airport based on some construction that's going on. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know we have our plan and we have great coordination between the FAA and the MAC on the preferred runway usage, but we've got a little bit of some challenges right now, right?
Absolutely. So the residents may notice the flight patterns have been a little bit different this summer. The MAC is currently doing necessary maintenance on 2 of our runways they've been closed since the beginning of June. And so with the fewer runways that are available, air traffic has been directing flights to the runways that are open. And so with that, as I said, residents will be noticing those flight patterns and aircraft in slightly different locations. The good news is that the construction is ending at the end of September, and we do expect that our flight patterns will return to pre-construction patterns.
All right, good. Thanks for that clarification. I want to remind folks that are just tuning in now and joining us, if you missed the beginning of our session, there were a number of videos that were presented, approximately 30 minutes worth, and all of the videos that were presented, as well as this live Q&A session, are being recorded and will be available on the FAA's YouTube channel after this session concludes. One thing I want to point out, though, that's based on the content that we just heard from Michelle and from Sean, is about what's was depicted in the videos themselves. When you see those dark purple lines, those are actual flight tracks taken from earlier this year. I believe it was April of this year. The pink shaded areas, that depicts the proposed spread or dispersion of where we will see aircraft, depending on the controller's direction, under the new RNAV procedures. So you'll see with the FAA has listened to the MAC, we've listened to the NOC, and the dispersion, the planned dispersion matches up very nicely with what our actual flights are today, pre-construction. All right, let's go on to our next question. And I'd like to ask our backroom folks, our tech support folks, to bring up board number 4, because board number 4, yeah. Oh God, you guys are fast. I want to bring up a question here, and really for our air traffic folks. So this, the question is, I live in Minneapolis. This is as it came in. I live in Minneapolis, north of the airport, and get planes over my house all day. How will these planes operate under RNAV to the north that was shown on the slide? So this is the north flow, as we talked about earlier. Let me go to Brian and then Matt for their input.
Well, it's a great question. The short answer is you shouldn't see any difference, but I'll kind of explain why. So what you'll see is, as Sean mentioned, we depart and take off into the wind. So that's when you'll see us using this direction. When we built these new procedures, we incorporated all the noise abatement stuff, and we tried to find as much compatible land as we could. The trouble with that direction is there's not a lot of it. There's a lot of densely populated neighborhoods in that direction. So you'll see that we kept the same dispersion though as we have currently in our new procedures, with multiple different headings to really kind of try and spread it out as much as we can over that area when we have to be that direction. Matt, do you have anything to add? What do you think?
Oh, yeah, to describe our RNAV departures, especially to the north, I'd like to see if we could bring up slide 6 if possible. Slide 6 talks about, and it shows our flight track patterns to the north. And during this, they will depart to the north on a specific flight path. Today, they depart on a heading. The heading will bring that plane on a specific track that we need for separation standards. So as you can see, the slide 6 that just came up, if you can look towards the center of the screen where it says Viking, VK, and NG, you can see that in the big arrow. You can see that little pink diamond just north of that. That pink diamond represents the waypoint in space. And so as the plane departs one of the runways to the north, for example, turning over the Minneapolis area, every airplane, every pilot, depending on the weather, sometimes the temperature affects it. When the plane gets to a certain safe altitude, it will turn towards that diamond just north of Viking. And so that's why you see all those tracks in all different areas, because every plane will be different as they get there. They won't be in the same area. There'll be more dispersion. And as the plane gets to that pink diamond, it's going to be up to us as controllers to turn those planes on course. You can kind of see those green and pink and lines to the east and northeast of the airport. And depending on where our arrivals are, we can turn them quicker on course, or we can have them go a little bit farther north and then start working their way to the northeast. That heading, that flight path, that Viking flight path, is basically used for all the aircraft going to the east of our airport. What you can't see is just to the east of the airport, there's a lot of satellite airspace, which means there's a lot of little guys flying around into the smaller airports like St. Paul and Anoka that we need to avoid. So basically that is the farthest northeast we can turn in that sort of north flow configuration. And let me just make sure that everyone understands, even though you see it as an RNAV departure, this is not a full RNAV departure procedure, which means every airplane is going to be going towards those diamonds you see that go counterclockwise to the west of the airport. However, after that, it's up to us to get them on course on different flight tracks. Other airports such as Phoenix and Denver have points in space basically all the way to their destination that they fly over every single day. And we do not, because of the collaboration we had with the Noise Oversight Committee and the Metropolitan Airport Commission, to make sure that this was a good procedure for everyone to be involved with.
All right, let's pull on that thread for just a minute, Matt. I want to make sure it's really clear to the audience. So if you've got full RNAV, how much dispersion is there? Or is there?
With full RNAV, it might be a little different again as they depart the airport, but as soon as they get to a certain altitude north of it, everyone's joining specific points at all times.
So they're flying
And
the same route all day. Same
all
planes,
day, all day.
Okay,
every
so
single day. And
all right.
And so those points to the north, those diamonds, represent also altitudes restrictions that the pilots need to comply with to ensure they climb above certain airspace below them, like Anoka to the north and Crystal to the northwest. And so this will ensure they keep climbing above these certain airspaces to ensure our separation standards, now that we won't have our VOR anymore, because our VOR makes us, gives us our crossing restriction.
Got it. All right, if we could leave this slide up for just another minute for our folks that are doing our support. I just want to call out for the audience a couple key things. And this is actually one of my favorite charts because there's so much information on it, right? So the dark lines indicate those flight tracks that we pulled back in from April, right? So actual flight tracks. And then the pink shading shows what our planned dispersion is under the new procedures. But all these colors, starting with the red to the orange to the yellow, and then the blue and the teal and the light green, they all depict the altitude of the aircraft, which is really, really important as far as noise, what the noise sounds like on the ground. And we talked earlier, I think, Matt, I think it was you in your informational video that talks about the impact of the altitude versus the noise. So we'll see some changes under the new procedures that will help to reduce the noise on the ground. But this really shows a lot of information, folks. Again, you'll see this same exact chart is in the informational videos that are at the beginning of our presentation. All right, let's pivot over to Captain Sato. Captain Sato, can you walk us through, give us a little bit of an overview of how an aircraft operates today versus how we'll operate under RNAV for a departure? Once that plane pushes back from the gate, we're all sitting in our seats. What's going on in the flight deck that we need to know about?
Absolutely. So today, with the departures out of Minneapolis, as we go to the runway, we have several things that we're doing just prior to taking the runway and in preparation that lead into kind of why this makes it safer. But earlier I mentioned how taking the runway is one of the highest workload environments for us because we have so many tasks to complete as we take that runway. We have to make sure that the aircraft is configured correctly in terms of the flaps are set to the right position. We have to coordinate with our flight attendants and ensure that all the passengers are in their seats and safe. We have to make sure that we have the proper fuel for the flight and that we're not below any fuel requirements to get to our destination. We have to confirm flight path and frequencies. We have to ensure that the flight path to the runway is clear as we're taking the runway so that there's no type of possible, incursion or near miss with another aircraft. So many items are being completed. And in terms of the path that we're going to fly off the runway and what we're planning for, today in Minneapolis, what we have is vectors off the runway. What that means is during all of those items that we're completing, we have to receive a clearance from tower and read that clearance back and set that clearance into our flight computers or onto our flight management panel. Now, this seems like not something that is so much of a task, but it is very easy to read back a wrong heading, entirely possible. We try to mitigate that through a controller reading me the clearance, me reading the clearance back to the controller, and everybody has to hear the same thing over the radio. But we prefer to not be working in terms of setting a heading as we take the runway because it's distracting us from all those other items. When it comes to what we're looking at in the future with an RNAV departure, that flight path on the runway will be established 30 minutes prior to us even leaving the gate. So when we take off now in Minneapolis, as we take off, the airplane will enter what's called an LNAV mode, or a lateral mode that's computed by the aircraft. And so when we get a clearance for takeoff, all the words that should come over the radio are cleared for takeoff. Today, what we receive is cleared for takeoff, climb on this heading to this altitude. So lots of information all at once as we take the runway. Tomorrow, or I'm sorry, in the future, it'll just be cleared for takeoff, which is a much safer method to do this operation.
Well, listen, I travel every week. I'm on an airplane at least twice a week. I'm going somewhere within the region and visiting with stakeholders. And I got to tell you, the less distraction you have up in the cockpit, or up in the flight deck, I should say, sounds better to me. I don't want you distracted. I want you focused on getting us where we need to go safely. So appreciate that insight on what it looks like behind the door. Okay, so we got another question about submitting a noise complaint. How can I submit a noise complaint? And Michelle, I think that I know the FAA has a process, but I think the MAC also has a process, right?
Absolutely. Yep. The MAC accepts complaints via our online portal. We also accept complaints via email or through our noise phone hotline. And to access all three of those, you can go to metroairports.org/community.
Okay, good information. Thank you very much. That's specific to the airports that the MAC oversees, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so the FAA also has a way to submit a noise complaint. You can use it for any airport nationwide. We have a noise portal, an online noise portal, and you can find that at www.faa.gov/noise/inquiries. That's www.faa.gov/noise/inquiries. And that portal, if you submit a complaint through that, you get a response on the condition and why you might be hearing that noise. Okay, let's go to our next question. Why does the FAA want to use RNAV, or area navigation procedures, at MSP in the first place? Let's go back to our air traffic folks. Sean, why don't you take the first crack at this?
Well, Eric, first of all, we're under congressional mandate to implement the new procedures nationwide. Minneapolis is one of the last airports to move forward with the initiative. But the reality is we're trying to improve safety, improve efficiency, and reduce emissions. These procedures tend to do all of those. And so it's important from a global aspect for us to implement these procedures and continue to have the safest and most efficient aerospace system in the world. And so that's kind of the high level view, I think, of why we're moving forward with RNAV procedures.
Okay, Matt, your thoughts?
Yeah, another reason why we're using RNAV is because we're losing our Minneapolis VOR because it's old and outdated. And another reason why RNAV is a good idea to have at Minneapolis is because, like Captain Cliff said, that it reduces communications between us and the pilots. And so if they can concentrate more in the cockpit and we can concentrate more on watching the operation, and it can save a lot of hear back, read back errors, which we talk about a lot. I'll say something and then the pilot needs to hear it and say it back to me correctly. There's a lot of times where they might interpret it wrong, or I might say something differently that they're not expecting. So there's a lot of workload that comes in between with those kinds of communications, and RNAV will really take that out of the equation.
Excellent. Robin?
Just to kind of piggyback on what Sean and Matt were saying, yes, Congress has mandated us to modernize our airspace, and the planes already have the technology. We just need to match that. So it's a way to move forward and to match the aviation community and their technology. And it's also just a modern day way for us to depict all the points that the pilots use for navigation.
Thanks to all three of you for that, for those answers. I'd also like to add that, I was talking at another airport not too long ago about the VOR Mons, and I was talking with our technical operations folks. They said that when they have to get parts for these things, it's extremely difficult. And in some cases, because these things are 50 and 60 years old, they actually have to fabricate parts, make them by hand. So this is an ongoing issue. It's very expensive. And so I'd like to also add that the expense part of it is an important thing. And I think that's part of the reason why, not the entire reason, because safety is first, as I've been saying all along, but part of the reason why switching over to RNAV will be beneficial as we move forward. Okay. Christy, you've been very quiet over there. That's about to change, just telling you. There's a question that came in, and I'm going to read it as it came in, and we're going to need a little help to explain what they're talking about here. So I'll read it as it's on my screen. It says, what is the difference between a CADX, an EA, and an EIS? So lots of acronyms. And it says this project should be an EIS. Last time the FAA made sweeping changes and it was supposed to be a CADX, which isn't good enough. We demand the FAA conduct an EIS, and it's ended with an exclamation point. So could you walk us through what a CADX is, what an EA is, and what an EIS is, and then talk about where we are in that process?
Sure. Those levels of NEPA review are outlined in our Order 1050.1, which is Environmental Impacts, Policies, and Procedures. And it discusses the differences between those three levels of a review. A CADX, or categorical exclusion, refers to a category of actions that do not individually or cumulatively have a significant effect on the environment. And if a proposed action falls within that scope, then we need to determine if any extraordinary circumstances exist. And if there are no extraordinary circumstances, then an EA or an EIS is not required. Now, I want to point out a CADX is not an exemption or waiver of NEPA review. It is a level of NEPA review. Next, we have an environmental assessment, or EA, and that's conducted when there's not an applicable categorical exclusion and or there is potential for significant impacts to resource areas. So we go through that analysis to determine that. Now, if we expect that significant impacts might occur from an action and they can't be mitigated below significant thresholds, then we move to an environmental impact statement or an EIS.
Okay, so that's what they're asking for in this particular comment or question. So where are we in the overall process from an FAA perspective?
Sure. Right now, we're still ruling out whether extraordinary circumstances exist and if there's any potential for significant impacts to our resource areas. So we're still in the data collection and analysis stage of that.
All right. So we don't have a determination just yet whether it's going to be, I'll use the acronyms again, a CADX, an EA, or an EIS, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. All right, I want to remind all of our attendees, if you've missed any portion of this workshop, you missed any of the graphics or the video presentations that we had early on, or you want to take a closer look, please remember that this session is being recorded and it will be available on the FAA's YouTube channel as soon as the workshop concludes today. We'll also be posting links on the FAA's community engagement webpage as well. Okay, let's get back to our questions. And looking at this, I'd like to ask our support folks to bring up board number 3. There it is. Here's a question for Matt. Matt, and then maybe Robin, if you want to weigh in. What areas of Edina will be impacted? Hopefully I said that correctly. Edina will be impacted by this change. and what noise can be expected?
Yeah, Eric, so yeah, that's Edina, and Edina is one of our communities to the west of the airport. And as you can see, our parallel runways are situated to the northwest because that's where most of our wind comes from most of the time. And so our airplanes will depart to the west and join flight paths to get onto their destinations. Those purple lines you see right now are tracks or flight paths from spring of this year. And that shows basically what it's going to be happening with our proposed procedures that we're having, because we're going to be using basically the same exact flight paths as we're using today, just with new technology.
All right, Robin, anything else you want to add?
No, Matt said it pretty well. Just everything that you see in front of you is what we're trying to replicate with the new technology. And then they're not necessarily going to go to each of those waypoints. We'll try and turn them sooner if we can, as long as they're at the correct altitude. So it depends on where other aircraft are, what is happening that day when we can get them on course. But nothing should be changing. I mean, what you see today should be what you see tomorrow.
All right, got it. Got it. And that adds to the dispersion, right? The light pink that we see on the screen is the planned dispersion under the new procedures. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Let's go to our next question. It says, I live in Apple Valley by the Pilot, Knob, and County Road 42. Will the new flight paths increase plane traffic in my area? So let me go to Sean for his thoughts on that. Apple Valley by Pilot, Knob, and County Road 42.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So aircraft that are going to overfly this area are typically departing either on runway 17 or they're departing on the parallels to the southeast, 12 left or 12 right. We will be mimicking the procedures that we utilize today. We'll be continuing to utilize the Egan-Mendota Heights corridor, and we'll be continuing to utilize the compatible land in the Minnesota River Valley. And so as far as will the flight paths increase, I can say that they'll be mimicked as much as they are today. So there should not really be a noticeable change.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's a common theme that we've been saying throughout the session today, that the planned procedures are going to very much replicate what we're seeing out there today with the qualifier, not the construction that we're seeing right now, but once the construction is done, what we would normally see as runway usage. Okay, Sean, let me keep you on the hot seat for a minute. Previously, you said that these upgraded RNAV procedures are designed to initially use multiple headings on departure, as is done today, to disperse traffic above the airport's surrounding communities.
Yes, that's correct, Eric. And just as in the previous question, very similar question, all the way around the airport, regardless of which runway we are using and the runway use system. We plan to utilize the same runway use system that we utilize today. The priorities of those runways will remain the same, and therefore we'll also be assigning the same headings. They'll just be delivered in a different format, that's all.
Okay, got it. Well, this is a good question. Michelle, are there any plans for soundproofing near the outlet mall in Egan, especially Silver Bell Road?
That's a great question. Yeah, I understand why people might have that question. So the MAX residential sound mitigation program goes until 2032. And so for this question and really any questions about that program, I would recommend that people go to our website or to contact us for more information. And again, that website is metroairports.org/community.
Got it. Okay, good. So they can go to the website, get some more information. All right, I would like to ask our support folks, to bring up board number, I think it's 11. Yeah, let's look at board number 11 for the next question. In the video, here's the question. In the video, it shows the north-south runway with departing straight south. Is this the new way? Currently, departures on the north-south runway going south turns and doesn't go straight. The neighborhoods straight south are, quote, sleeping, end quote, residential neighborhoods that were in place before the north-south runway. For example, they're saying that this is not designed for noise or air traffic. And then it goes on to say, let me read the rest of this question. Oh no, I think that's the end of the question. So let me go to Matt and also to Robin. And if you need me to repeat any of that, let me know.
Yep. So the darker purple just south on runway 17 is showing historical data from spring of this year. And during that procedure, the tower will give basically fly the runway heading on departure. And then after that, eventually give a turn towards their destination. And so it might be heavily concentrated from that because there was the airplane wasn't on a good spot to turn, or they weren't ready to turn on course with other traffic in the area for safety. But with our new proposed procedures, we are going to be departing runway 17, but then making a right turn to concentrate over the Minnesota River. And so that turn will take the noise away from some of those communities and then keep climbing to the southwest before we can turn them back on course. So that's how we're going to fix that issue.
Okay, let me do a quick sound check. Robin, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
All right, perfect. My original headset decided to take the rest of the afternoon off. So I'm back on my backup. You guys always have to have a backup plan. So anything you want to add to what Matt said?
Not so much. I know when we were coming up with these procedures, it was really important to everybody involved that we keep the flight paths over the river as much as possible. So we did do some tweaking with some of those fixes over there. And that's what we came up with is trying to keep them over the river as long as possible until they get to a higher altitude and we can send them on their way.
Got it. Okay, the next question is, can this map be shared so we can see the detail? This view, it's impossible to zoom in and out to know the impact to areas. And the answer is yes. This deck will be posted on the FAA's Community Engagement and MSP webpage. And in addition, the recordings of the videos that we presented earlier, as well as all the proceedings, will be on the FAA's YouTube page directly after this meeting concludes. And there'll also be a link on that same community engagement webpage. So you'll be able to get everything you want to look at in additional detail at your leisure once the session concludes. Matt, I'm going to read this question for you. I think it's probably best directed to you. And I'm going to read it as it's written. It says, sorry, I tried to do a new paragraph on my prior question by hitting the enter button. It automatically sent my message before I could ask the question. My question for our citizens is, what happens after the initial multiple headings on departure? In other words, will any community suffer from more noise as a result of subsequent determined headings after the initial multiple headings on departure? Please explain in detail and in layman's language. And I'll thank, since he included his name, I won't include his whole name, but I'll say thank you, Dan, for that question. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, as we're going to explain how the departure procedures will work, specifically over Sunfish Lake. So the planes will depart towards a certain point in space. And that will be varying depending on how quick the airplane is climbing. And during cold temperatures, planes will climb faster. During warmer temperatures, they won't climb as fast. So every day will change. And so that's where the dispersion comes in. As they get towards that point in space, our job at all times is to get them on course as soon as possible. So depending on where there's arrivals coming into Minneapolis, or there's little towered airports around us, such as Flying Cloud and St. Paul. We will be turning those airplanes as soon as possible. And again, with construction this summer, the flight paths have been very different than our normal day-to-day operations. So going back to our spring stuff, we're going to be mimicking more of that. So like we say, no one community is going to be affected more than another, because we're going to be mimicking basically what we did in the past and trying to keep that dispersed as much as we can at all times.
All right, got it. Dan, hopefully we've answered your question. If not, feel free to submit another question, or as I mentioned earlier, you can submit a formal written comment, and I'll talk about how to do that in a little bit. Okay, so here's the next question. It sounds like you picked the flight track based on what the airlines would want and don't consider the community or the noise issues. Let's kick that over to Sean for his initial thoughts. It sounds like you picked flight track based on what the airlines would want and don't consider the community noise issues.
So Eric, the flight paths are really based upon the city pair. In other words, I'm just going to use Minneapolis and Atlanta, for instance. And in the case of that particular departure to arrival point, that's going to determine the path in which they're going to fly. Similar to if you're trying to enter a highway, you have to take a specific on-ramp to enter that highway. This is the same concept. And so those city pairs are really predicated on overall commerce and what the community will want to have to meet the needs of business or pleasure travel, or a business operator be able to move their folks around the country to make meetings or other business uses. And so, initially we must determine that that path is safe. And after that, we look at the efficiency of the route and try to minimize the miles flown and so on. But as I said, we do have a runway use system here that we also look at to try to minimize the amount of noise over residents as much as feasible and utilize that compatible land out there.
Captain Sato, would you like to weigh in on this as well from an airline perspective?
Certainly. When we begin these airspace projects, and we do a lot of these projects around the country, all of those in the room, which include many from this panel, we start by looking at everybody's objectives and goals and the outcomes that we want to see at the end of this. And from an airline perspective, the thing we care about the most is what we're creating safer than what we had in the past. We're always trying to drive towards something safer in our future because it's obviously our number one priority and should be the goal. So safety is the driving factor when it comes to a lot of these decisions. Beyond safety, then we start talking about, what are the goals for each person in the room, and that would be people like the noise community, or people like the airport and the controllers, or people like the airlines. And for the airline, when it comes to kind of the secondary factor of safety, it's can we actually achieve what is being suggested? If we have altitudes that are required for us to climb to on these departures, can our aircraft actually climb fast enough to make those altitudes? Do we have the ability to do that with the procedures in place that we have at the airline? So is it safe and isn't it achievable? And then the last thing we think about, to kind of put it into a balanced approach is, how do we do this with the community in mind and with efficiency for the company? Efficiency can be measured in a lot of ways. At Delta, we think about efficiency in terms of it may be flight path miles. How do we get from one place to another with the least amount of miles flown, or gas burned? Because sometimes It's not necessarily flight path miles alone that define how much gas we burn. It could be the profile in which we fly, how quickly we can get up to altitude. The faster we get up to altitude, the more fuel efficient we are. Or efficiency can be defined by how much we can use the airspace. How many planes can we put in the same amount of space versus another place? So lots of ways to define that. But then also the community concerns of where do we want to put these planes? And so in this case, this was all part of the story here in Minneapolis. And it's been said before, but as far as these procedures were concerned, the mission at the beginning and what we heard from the community was create something with RNAV that was as similar to what's happening today in Minneapolis as possible. And so I think that's what we drove towards. As Sean noted, if this was purely just, us, this benefiting Delta, then we would have a straight line between Minneapolis and Atlanta, or a straight line between Minneapolis and New York. So as you can see, that's not what's on the chart on the display here. We're willing and happy to help with these designs so that we're being the best neighbors we can be to the people of Minneapolis. So I hope that's well understood. Is we want to be good neighbors, and we're doing. At Delta, we're doing a lot of things beyond this in terms of investment in new types of aircraft and engines that are quieter, and airspace designs like this that can hopefully provide us the same or possibly even quieter airspace into the future.
Thank you, Captain Zato. I think that was some really good perspective, and I'd also like to add, from an FAA perspective, look, we're coming up with procedures first and foremost with safety in mind. But as Matt illustrated earlier, if you've got pure RNAV, right? And Captain Sato, you just mentioned this, right? If we have pure RNAV, that's like a straight line over the same people all day long, multiple flights all day long. And that's not dispersion. And that's not what's happening today. And that's not what's in the proposed plan. We're planning in the proposed plan to operate much the same way we do today. To make sure that the noise and the flights are indeed dispersed. So thanks for the perspective on that. Okay, here's my next question that's come in. It says, is there going to be an increase in the use of the north-south runway going south, heading south? So Brian, would you like to comment on that? The increase in the use of the north-south runway going south?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the RNAV procedures will have zero impact on which runways we decide to use. That is purely based off what's operationally required. And the biggest driver of that is weather, predominantly the wind. Airplanes need to point into the wind when they land and into the wind when they depart. So that's really what's going to decide which runway we're using, which direction we're arriving and departing aircraft. But we currently have departures off of all the runways, and the RNAVs will be available the same way, which will allow us the same flexibility when we need to do what we need to for the weather.
All right, got it. Excellent answer. Matt, let me pivot to you for a more specific question that just came in. It says, are you moving traffic from Mendota Heights corridor to the south?
No, we're not. We're trying to mimic exactly what we're doing today. We're just using the new technology of RNAV, and it's going to mimic the dispersion that we're trying to do to disperse all the noise evenly throughout the cities.
All right, good insight and good overview. Robin, next question I'd like you to take a crack at, if you don't mind. Let me read it. It says, hello, I live near Lake Harriet. So those of you who live near Lake Harriet, you've got somebody out there representing your interests. It says, it would be nice to get a break from the plane noise when the flow changes from south to north. I thought this is what the straight out departure guidance was about. Why doesn't this seem to be followed?
Well,
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question. So as far as,
Do you want to, let me repeat it. It says,
sure.
hello, I live near Lake Harriet. It would be nice to get a break from the plane noise when the flow changes from south to north. In other words, maybe they're advocating for south to north changes. I'm not sure. I thought this is what the straight out departure guidance was about. Why doesn't this seem to be followed?
Well, aircraft are in the same areas today as they will be tomorrow. We are, our RNAV procedures are, like we keep saying, are mimicking what we do today. And we're basing where aircraft depart depending on the wind. So it just depends on what the weather is doing today, and where they're going to be heading. As far as their flight paths, I mean, the current ones we're gonna mimic as much as we can with the RNAV departures. I don't know if that necessarily answers.
Well, let me pull on a little bit of a different thread on this. So flight procedures at the airport, north flow, south flow, can change at any time depending on the weather and the winds, right?
Correct.
Okay. So there may be, even though you have a whole plan for the day and you're planning to operate in a certain configuration, that can change depending on what the weather throws at us, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I'll say to the person that submitted that question, if you need more clarification, feel free to submit another question. We've got a lot of questions in the queue. Hopefully we can come back to that one if you need more clarification. Okay. The next question is, can you tell us if there are any Minneapolis neighborhoods that will now be in the flight path that were previously not? And if so, which ones? So Matt, you want to take a crack at that answer?
Sure. So with our current summer construction, we've had very non-standard flight paths with how we've been using our airport. The closure of two of our major runways has greatly affected and kind of handcuffed which runways we could use depending on the wind. And so it's kind of hard to judge what this person might be asking with how the flight paths will affect them, because it's different than is today with construction. But going back to last spring, that's what it's going to look like for the most part. We're going to be, again, mimicking what we're doing today or last spring, just using different technology. This isn't a total revamp of how we're going to depart airplanes off the airport. It's just basically mimicking what we're doing today because it works for safety, it works for efficiency, and it works for all the other airplanes that are operating within our airspace.
All right. Got it. Good insight. I got a question that I'll take. It says, is this the right meeting? I thought it was about noise. So as we shared at the top of the meeting, at the top of the session, this online meeting is about sharing the new proposed flight procedures that the FAA will be implementing in 2025. Noise is a byproduct of flight, and to that end, it's important that we include all the things that went into the development of these draft procedures, share the development, share the rationale, and answer your questions to make sure that we're engaging with the community and you have an opportunity to contribute. Okay. Let me read this question. It says, just to be clear, we care about noise. No one cares about the coordination. Can we move to what people care about? Let me tell you, we hear you. We hear you and we understand. That's why we're working with the NOC and the MAC on the places where we can minimize noise and while maintaining the safety and the efficiency of the airport. And the MAC and the mayor's office and many other stakeholders asked us early on to ensure that we did not make the new procedures have more of a significant impact than they do today. And I think by far and large, our team has done a great job in doing just that. And as you saw in the video that we presented earlier, and as our subject matter experts have pointed out today, that the new procedures will operate very much like they do today with dispersed flight paths for every flight. And really, a lot of those decisions on where exactly those flights will go will be determined by the controller at the time based on weather and other operational and safety factors. Okay. I live by Lake Nokomis. It seems that you're not being forthright. Efficiency, safety, and cost is a rule for saying our lives become more difficult. So Matt, it's a bit of a comment versus a question, but do you want to take a crack at responding to that?
Yeah, so Lake Nokomis is just north of the airport, and a lot of our aircraft are going towards that area to turn either to the east, towards the East Coast, or to the north to go to northern Minnesota or even to Europe. And those flight paths are made because of our airspace design, because not only are we as controllers having airplanes in and out of Minneapolis, we have airplanes in and out of all the smaller airports around us. So our airspace is designed where we cannot really turn any more farther east than Lake Nokomis to the north. Unfortunately, that does concentrate some of that in that area, but we do have specific tracks set up or flight paths set up where we will disperse the noise towards basically a 360 heading and a 340 heading and a 320 heading, just like today. And we use all three of those just like today to disperse the noise. Ground control at our tower will set up airplanes to depart specifically so they're not constantly in that same area over Lake Nokomis. So we do look at that almost every day, including during construction, to disperse the noise.
All right, I'm having an audio issue. Can you hear me, Matt? Yes?
Yes, I can hear you now.
we can.
Yes.
All right, good. Well, don't all jump in at once. I mean, come on. There we go. Listen, I want to ask Matt, before we move off this question, could I ask our support folks to bring up slide number 11? Excuse me, slide number 2. Slide number 2 that shows all of the airports around. Because Matt, I think that's a key piece of what we're talking about here. So we can bring that up quickly. That would be, I think, advantageous. Yes, that's the one. Matt, can you talk us through this just a little bit more in light of that question?
Oh, yeah, so as you can see in the center of that screen, it says MSP, that's us, our airport. And you can kind of see that concentrated blue, those darker blues just to the left of the MSP letters. That's the Lake Nokomis area. And you can see how they get less darker as they go to the northeast because we're turning those planes as soon as we can. And that all depends on where the arrivals are. It depends on if there is arrival. Sometimes there aren't, and we can turn a lot quicker on their destination. And also you can see those STP, ANE, MIC, and FCM. Those are towered airports around us. And departure controllers are staying in their airspace to avoid those specific arrivals and departures in and out of those airports. We have a lot of flight training that goes in and out of those smaller airports, as well as a lot of general aviation that use those airports to transit our airspace.
All right, very, very good insight. Very good insight. Thank you, support team, for bringing up that image. And let's move on to our next question. It's more of a comment along with a question. It says, this was confusing. And I'll have to watch again. And I'll remind the audience that everything here is being recorded. So you can take a look at your leisure and watch the entire video, including all the informational pieces that were at the beginning of it on the FAA's YouTube channel.
The submitter goes on to say, my main concern is traffic, both inbound and outbound, flying directly over my house, northwest of Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. Is the main difference that's being proposed in that departing aircraft will climb more quickly? So is that the main difference, Sean?
So I think the departures will continue to climb as they do today. There currently is a restriction for aircraft to be out of a certain altitude when they're a certain distance from the airport, and that will exist with the new procedures. So realistically, they're not necessarily going to climb any faster than they do today. They'll just have to meet that restriction and be above that altitude. As we talked about, the wind and weather determine the path that aircraft will depart. Whether they have to depart into the wind, certain climatological differences will cause aircraft to perform differently. In the wintertime, with more dense air, aircraft climb faster than in the summertime with less dense air. But realistically, they should continue to climb as they do today. They should continue to disperse as they do today, as that was one of the features that we had as a common goal in designing these procedures.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Sean. Is there a way to see a detail of how a particular neighborhood will be impacted? And the note is a comparison of the current versus proposed. So is there a way to see a detail of how a particular neighborhood will be impacted? Comparison of current versus proposed. So let's look at this from a noise perspective. And Christy, what are your thoughts?
Sure. Well, we don't necessarily focus on particular neighborhoods. We look at the project as a whole. But in our analysis, we do compare what is proposed with what currently is there and what that change is. And then, of course, all of our documentation will be presented on the project website once that's completed.
Okay. So there is a process for us to continue to keep folks informed of where we are in the process. That's a yes. I see. Yes. Okay, good.
Sorry.
I'll take it as,
yes.
I'll take it as a yes. Okay, our next question is, how do the elevations in the proposed flight paths compare to the prior months of actual data? Have we taken a direct comparison of elevation in the last, say, 1 to 3 months versus the proposed elevations? And they say they're seeking numbers here, please. So Sean, do you want to take a crack at that? And do you need me to repeat any of that?
No, I think I've got it, Eric. Currently aircraft must meet climb restrictions that require them to be out of at least 3,500 feet within 7 miles of the airport. And so as we depicted on the previous slides, there are going to be waypoints out in space that will help aircraft mimic that behavior. And some of those waypoints have a restriction for aircraft to cross at or above 4,000 feet. We expect aircraft to climb similarly to today and meet those climb restrictions just as they do today. And hopefully that answers that question.
But do we expect them to climb more quickly, or I'm not saying at a steeper pitch. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is to get to altitude faster.
I think what we're going to see is very similar behavior to what we see today. And I think Captain Sato may be able to add a little bit of insight into what actually takes place with the aircraft as they climb in the two different environments.
Yes. So, as we stated, Delta's not going to climb any different next year versus today. In terms of how we climb, our procedures are based on manufacturer recommendations by safe airspeeds for the aircraft to fly at. And those airspeeds that we fly at and the thrust available to us determine how quickly we can climb. If it was, a perfect world and we could have the most efficient flight ever, we would climb at our max power and get to our final altitude as quickly as possible. And that would be the most efficient in terms of fuel burn as well. And when we talk about noise in general, the best way to reduce noise is to increase altitude, to get higher. So, one of the goals of these procedures, and I think it'll be achieved, is to allow us to continue climbing and to continue us getting away from the ground. So the more we can climb and the less restricted we are from leveling off at any given altitude, the more quiet all these procedures will be. And just to kind of touch on something we talked about earlier, as we go forward, Delta is making a lot of investments in new aircraft with much quieter engines. So that by itself should show some impact. To what Sean said about these altitudes that are being defined out in space around Minneapolis, those are more like contractual guarantees. So what it does is it says, okay, with this altitude at this place, I promise I'll be above that. And what it allows controllers to do is to take or give less attention to me because I'm going to meet certain climb requirements so that I'm not or I won't possibly have a conflict with another aircraft. In all those little outlying airfields that we showed on that chart there around Minneapolis and St. Paul. So the idea for these altitude constraints is merely to have a contractual agreement that says, I promise I'll be above these altitudes, so I won't be a problem for you with other aircraft as I go away from Minneapolis. But our climb profiles will be no different tomorrow than they are today.
All right, great answer, Sean, and excellent clarification on that, Captain Sato. Very much appreciated. Okay, so let's go back to Christy. Christy, I think, let me just read through this. I think this will probably be a good question for you. Let me read it. There were many variables, dispersion, path, altitude, glide / step, etc. discussed, but it does not quantify the impact of the change to noise. Can you show a graphical model with a forecast of the difference in noise, the level and frequency between the existing and the proposed flow models?
Sure. I mean, those definitely are factors that we consider in our noise modeling, as well as fleet mix and runway usage. At this time, we don't have a graphic to show because we are still finalizing our noise modeling, but that will be included in our environmental package and posted on our website.
Okay, so it's not available yet, but it will be forthcoming. Is that a good summation of it?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, good.
We'll have it all in our environmental documentation.
Perfect. Our next question says, I am glad to hear that noise sensitive areas like residential areas were considered during the modification of standard instrument departures or SIDs. Can you explain how you applied your noise sensitive area philosophy to the south flow departures off of runway 12 left or 12L? And let me kick that over to Sean for his thoughts.
Thanks, Eric. So as far as departures in south flow off of 12 left, those departures are departing into what we have referred to several times in this discussion as the Mendota Heights, the Egan-Mendota Heights corridor. We have been in our discussions with the MAC and of course through feedback from the Noise Oversight Committee, there's a desire to put as many aircraft into that corridor that and maintain aircraft within that corridor when we can. And so we do that today. We intend to do that in the future. And we'll continue to utilize that corridor through our voluntary use of the noise abatement procedures.
All right, and Sean, I mean, we had Mac, the Mac provide, as I understand, the Mac provided some input on some potential environmental and operational impacts and the surrounding communities to the work group. And then, if I understand it correctly, the work group took that input into consideration when developing the draft procedures. Do I have that correct?
Yes, absolutely. As we've talked about before, and we considered all the stakeholder interests, and there were certainly some interests to try and shorten procedures or move procedures that might have taken aircraft away from that corridor. We took all of the concerns, though, into consideration, and of course, reaching consensus amongst the stakeholders through that collaborative process determined that this was the best way to do things going forward.
Okay, very good. So here's the next question. It says, in determining departure paths, how much value is put on efficiency and destination versus noise reduction to populated areas, specifically for north departures? So Sean, let me come back to you for your thoughts on that one.
Certainly. So Eric, when we are departing to the north, we are almost immediately entering airspace that's over residential areas. There are not a lot of places for us to go to the north and avoid residential areas. And so the key message that we received from community member input would be that we want to disperse that traffic as much as possible. And so we, of course, as we've indicated, first have to provide safe departure procedures and safe use of headings that keep aircraft separated. After that, we look at the efficiency of the flight while considering those voluntary noise abatement procedures that will disperse aircraft as much as feasible. So it's a concert of all of those together that achieve the final result. But if we wanted to, prioritize them, safety is always going to be number one.
Right.
Efficiency is always going to be number two, with consideration of number three, those concerns of the community and trying to find that compatible land use.
Got it. I like the way you laid that all out. And within safety is included what the operational restrictions might be for the day, whether it's wind or weather or other things, or construction, things like that, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Captain Sato, I've got a question here. It's a little more specific to from an airline perspective from the flight deck. Let me read what they've submitted here. It says, with a higher climb rate, all things equal, will more power be needed and thus create more noise?
Well, again, we're not changing our climb rates. The required climb gradient is changing slightly, but we're already meeting this increased climb gradient that we'll see in the future. Like if we looked at that graphic that had altitudes that we're flying today, most of those aircraft crossing those boundary lines are well above 4,000 feet by the time they're getting there. So, our thrust settings, our climb rate, we're going to have the same exact thrust and climb rate when these procedures are implemented as we do today.
I know Matt had talked about this earlier in the presentation, and we've actually covered this topic a couple of times, but I think it's really important what you just said it really sort of drives home the point that not only will the aircraft be flown much in the same way that they are flown today, but also the flight paths coming from the controllers will be very much the same as they are today. So I think that's a key thing that we want to make sure that our audience out there is hearing from us, that we listened to you. We listened to the feedback from the MAC. We listened to the feedback from the NOC, and we designed the procedures in mind with that requirement that what happens in the future will be much like it is today. Okay, So let me go to the next question. It says, it is my understanding that no information was pre-shared with the public or our community representatives. This limits public review and comment. This seems intended to limit public feedback, which seems like this is a mandate. How have you engaged public communities before this with transparent information that allows for people to interpret and review information and impacts before being put on the spot with limited opportunity to ask questions? So we have engaged with the MAC and the NOC throughout this process, engaged with the MAC on the development of the procedures, the draft procedures. We even engaged with the NOC to get their initial feedback as your community representatives. Now I realize that not all of the communities are represented by the NOC. So the NOC gave us some initial feedback, and where we could, we incorporated that feedback. But this is the importance of this session today, to be able to go through the draft procedures, explain what they are, answer your questions in real time, give you an opportunity to submit formal comments so that we continue to be open and transparent with what we're proposing to do in 2025. So I would gently, very gently push back and say there is an opportunity for you to submit your comments and your feedback. This is the start of the process. It doesn't end here today. We've got another session tomorrow, much like this one, and we'll continue to receive your comments and your questions for another 30 days. And I'll talk about that when we close out the session, when we get to it. So we're very much interested in what you have to say. Okay. Is there coordination between the public community, or does the FAA focus on airports and airlines, and then the noise is an afterthought? So is there coordination between the public, or does the FAA focus on airports and airlines, and then noise is an afterthought? You know, safety and efficiency are number one and number two, as my fellow panelists have said today. And with noise, we worked with the NOC and the MAC, as I just illustrated in my previous response, to try and find solutions which did not impact safety or efficiency, and attempting to mitigate noise or replicate what we're doing today. So much of what we're going to see in 2025 will be exactly as what we see today, again, with the asterisk, without the construction that's going on at MSP right now. But Cliff, anything you want to add from an airline perspective?
I think, you know, we kind of keep beating this this drum, but you know, absolutely, we considered the noise community. I mean, this was integral to each one of the discussions we had as we went through the design process. You know, these procedures, you know, I live in Atlanta. I come in with the perspective of representing Delta, and again, I want to make sure that what we're talking about is safe, that it's achievable. But these procedures were designed by local Minnesotans. You know, they're designed by the people that control our aircraft in Minneapolis-St. Paul. These air traffic controllers are your neighbors. They also live in the community, and they're also subject to this noise. So, you know, we certainly attacked this problem with the local community's concerns in mind, each one of these procedures.
All right, thank you very much, Captain. Now listen, folks out there, I want you to know that we're past the top of the hour, and we're going to keep going. I'm not saying we're going to go all night. We're going to keep going for a little while longer. We've got a lot of great questions here in the queue, and I want to make sure that we've got an opportunity for our subject matter experts, while I've got them, to answer as many questions as we can. So Captain Sato, let me come right back to you. Do the changes that we're proposing mean changes to pilot training? What about a foreign country airplane landing or taking off from MSP? Would it be that easy or difficult to follow these new procedures?
It would undoubtedly make things easier for all, both domestic and foreign. You know, Minneapolis-St. Paul, it's a major international airport. And traditionally at airports like this, we would take off on RNAV departures around the country. So this is something we do every day in the operation, East Coast to West Coast. And our competitors from international airlines that come into the United States, they want to be on RNAV departures. You know, when we talk about radio usage and communicating back and forth controller to pilot, you can imagine how much more challenging it is for a controller to speak to someone from, say, Germany or Japan, and language barriers that exist. If we can have things that are proceduralized and sent to us over data links or looked at 30 minutes prior to the flight, that makes it much simpler for the operation, especially for foreign carriers.
Excellent, excellent overview. Appreciate that. Hey, Matt, let me go to you and ask a question about, because you touched on this before, I think it's worth repeating. The question that is submitted is, it says, why are we not using full RNAV at MSP? Full RNAV.
We're not using full RNAV and MSP because as we started developing these procedures, we obviously looked a lot of feedback from our noise community and MAC on how it affects them. And as we developed these new procedures, we also realized that there were situations how our airspace is developed that we were more efficient without full RNAV because the full RNAV always encompasses the arrivals. And we always, here in Minneapolis, we don't have constant arrivals. And so we also realized that it probably was just the best idea to just mimic what we're doing today to continue to be as efficient as possible and also keep that noise dispersion because the full RNAV did not give that noise dispersion.
Good, good. Excellent, excellent recap on that. My next question, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment. It's from Dan, who commented earlier in our session. And let me read this. Captain Sato, regarding the airlines, sorry, excuse me, forgot the beginning of it. It says, great comments by Captain Sato. Regarding the airlines, would totally love straight line flight paths, but are happy to accommodate the noise concerns of communities. Please repeat that perspective tomorrow for residents attending that session. Most residents do not understand the airport is limited in the flight patterns due to uncontrolled weather patterns. His, Captain Sato's, perspective was a great response, which should be easily understood by most residents. It demonstrates the degree of cooperation all stakeholders, which is important for angry residents to understand. Best regards, Dan. Okay, so there you go, a compliment, but a direction. So we've heard you, Dan. We'll make sure that we include some of that same language tomorrow. But even if it's not the same language, remember this session is going to be recorded, is being recorded. So you'll be able to hear Captain Sato as many times as you like on repeat on our YouTube channel. Okay, here's another question coming in. Brian, I think this is probably best for you. And let me read what they've submitted. It says, our military C-130s are not RNAV capable. For us and other aircraft that are not RNAV capable, how will we depart/arrive MSP once the new RNAV procedures are implemented? How should we file our flight plans?
It's a great question. So and what you're going to do is you're going to file your flight plans just like you do today. And we're going to give you a heading and an altitude just like we do today. So essentially you revert to current procedures if you're not RNAV capable.
Good. Straightforward answer. Next question. Can you share how these departure changes might impact noise levels functionally across South Minneapolis? Will it increase sound under flight paths all over? Do you anticipate that MAC would offer more rounds of noise abatement programs in the future? So Michelle, you can see, I'm going to come to you in a second, but let me comment first and say that that, as we've been saying all along, we do expect the noise levels functionally across the area around the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport to be very similar to what you experience today when there is no construction. So that is dispersed flights on a daily basis, really based on the operational restrictions that are in place due to wind and weather and other considerations. But Michelle, could you comment on whether or not the MAC would offer more rounds of noise abatement in the future?
Absolutely. I can share that our noise mitigation program is currently scheduled to go until 2032, so well into the future. And we determine eligibility by looking at actual data, so actual aircraft that flew and what runways they fly on. So that all of that information will be incorporated into the analysis that we conduct annually. And that information is provided to the public and to the Noise Oversight Committee. And we also share it on our website, again, at metroairports.org/community.
Okay, very good. Our next question is, are the departure and arrival path data publicly available? I would like to use it for deciding on buying a new house. Michelle, do you want to comment on that?
Absolutely. So we have a lot of data that we share with the public and with the Noise Oversight Committee. We have a flight tracker tool that shows historic and current flight or real-time flight tracks that shows how the aircraft, where flights are, how aircraft are moving in and out of the airport. We publicly provide that through our website, which I've shared. And so all of that data is available.
All right, very good. Folks, we're going to continue on. We've got a number of questions that they just keep coming in, which is great. Thank you so much for your engagement today. We're going to get to as many of them as we can today as we continue on with the session. If you have to drop off for other commitments, no worries. The entire session will be recorded, as I've mentioned before, and you'll be able to view the entire thing on our YouTube channel later on. Okay, let's move on. Looking at the south flow departures off runway 17, it doesn't appear that the aircraft is following the river south until reaching that 6,000 foot. Is that the new procedure being proposed? Matt, let me come to you for that one, and let me know if you need any of that repeated.
Sure, yeah. So for that departure procedure off runway 17, that is a brand new procedure with the turns directly over the Minnesota River almost immediately as they depart to the south. The historical data that they're probably looking at right now is probably just showing what we used to move the airplanes ourselves towards the Minnesota River eventually on course to their destination, to areas to the southwest. We have a SID that goes to the southwest, but we don't have that proposed procedure published at this time, and no one has flown it yet. But the new one will fall over the river basically as soon as they get to a safe altitude and turn over the river to climb.
So let me just clarify something. You said a brand new procedure. So you're saying brand new as in it's in existence today, or it's brand new as part of the proposal?
Part of the proposal right now, the procedures we have just headings coming off of the airport. These will be flight paths that are points in space that specifically put them over the river at a safe altitude to continue to minimize the noise below in the surrounding communities to the south of our airport.
Oh, got it. So that way, if they're over the river, I'm just sort of repeating what you said. If they're over the river, theoretically, they're not over houses and over people.
Yep, that is correct.
Okay, got it. Next question. When will all of these proposals come into effect? What are the steps prior to proposals to become an approved SOP? Is it only MSP going through these upgrades, or other airports as well? So the proposed date for these new procedures is August of 2025. Right now, airports all over the country have RNAV procedures for departures and arrivals. And Minneapolis, MSP is one of the last large airports that do not have RNAV procedures. So 2025 in August is the plan. Our next question, will there be it says RVAD, but I think they mean RNAV. Will there be non-RNAV SIDS available for aircraft? Oh, excuse me. Well, RVAD SIDS available for aircraft that are not RNAV capable, MSP, based on C-130s? Or will these procedures be, I'm reading this as written, or will these procedures be phased out with the implementation of the new procedures? I believe they mean RNAV. So will there be non-RNAV SIDS available for aircraft that are not RNAV capable? And they mentioned the C-130s. So Robin, over to you. Thoughts? Oh, we lost Robin.
Robin's having some technical difficulties.
Gotcha.
I'll
I got
take
Matt,
over
you're the guy
that right now.
Here you go. That's all yours.
I'm the guy. So yeah, we still will have departure procedures for non-RNAV equipped aircraft. And those will be basically what we do today with our headings that come off of the airport. So the controllers in the tower will give those airplanes without RNAV capability a heading to depart on, which is basically what they do today. And then we in the TRACON will then take them from that heading on course to where they need to go for their destination.
All right, good. Thanks for jumping in. And if I have any other inkling that I'm going to go to Robin, it's all coming to you, Matt. Copy that. All right, let's move on. Here's a question. It says, are you using the latest data? There has been an incredible increase in the population south of the airport. Apple Valley is also a dense community. So, Christy, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. I mean, for my NEPA analysis, we use the most current available data. We get a lot of our data from the census or some online screening tools like EJ Screen or NEPA Assist. And then we also utilize information that we gather during these information sessions where people give us some information that might not be included in those other tools.
Any other comments on that, Sean, on the latest data?
So Eric, we've used the most up-to-date data that we have with the design of these procedures throughout the process. And I know that there's constant evaluations that are taking place. Michelle may be better to describe what the MAC does in reporting out to communities, what they see, aggregate data versus month-to-month data or impacts, but that sounds more like what this community member is asking about. Michelle, anything you could add?
Sure. Yeah, the MAC does track and report all of the runway use data at MSP as well as our other airports. And we do provide that to the public through our noise roundtables, like the Noise Oversight Committee. And then we also provide monthly reports for MSP. We do annual reports and studies, special analyses that are done through the NOx work plan. And all of those we do provide on our website. So we do try and provide as much information publicly as possible about the operations and activity that are going on at the airport. So that's all up to date on a regular basis, on a daily basis, to be honest, but then we finalize it every month.
Good. Very, very good. Good insight. Appreciate all of that. Okay, here's a comment, not a question. And I'll read it as it's written. It says, this isn't a question, but I just want to say that I love two of the RNAVs, I think they mean the procedures, around MSP are named Gray, spelled Grrey, and Duck, Duhck. As a native Minnesotan, I think that's absolutely fantastic. We couldn't agree more. And I got to tell you that the people that work on the procedures, they live here in Minnesota. They are your fellow Minnesotans. So They have a say in what the procedures are named, but thanks for that comment. We certainly appreciate it. Okay. Are you going to keep, the next question, folks, are you going to keep the 2.6 mile requirement before planes change direction? Are you going to keep the 2.6 mile requirement before planes change direction? Brian, over to you.
I think what they're talking about is the mileage we need off 17 before we turn over the river. But really just kind of an overarching statement. Any of the noise abatement practices that we currently use today, we built them into these procedures. So you're going to see the same thing with the proposed procedures as you see currently. If we go out 2.6 miles, the procedure is going to go 2.6 miles. So you don't expect to see any changes there.
Got it. Got it. Thank you. Our next question. I'm a Minneapolis resident, and my overall impression from the webinar is that there will be less noise for southern departures, but the northern departures will have similar noise. I am under the flight path, and the noise can be so much with planes going late into the night and starting again before the sun rises. Is there any chance to actually decrease noise in Richfield and Minneapolis through RNAV? So let me come to you, Sean, first for your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So realistically, the noise that is experienced in Minneapolis and over really any of the other communities should be the same as what they experience today. We're not decreasing noise in any one area at the expense of noise in another area. And that was a critical element of the design of these procedures. As we had talked about before, there are ways to utilize RNAV to concentrate aircraft and move noise, but that would be at the expense of moving that noise over some other community. And so that was definitely an interest that was not supported by anybody on this project. We wanted to ensure that, at the input from the Noise Oversight Committee, that noise distribution was fair and as fair as possible through the dispersion of flight routes. And so it may seem when we talk about the compatible land use that residents to the south may get some type of relief or whatnot. While that may be true that there are some industrial areas we can take advantage of and there aren't those areas to the north, we don't intend to move any traffic over a different community and create noise over a different community. That was definitely not intended.
Okay, good. So we, clearly we took into account in the development of the draft procedures, the feedback from the MAC and, additional feedback from the NOC and their initial review. Matt, anything else you want to add to what Sean said about the southern departures versus the northern departures?
Oh yeah, so with the last few months, our procedures have been a lot different because of our construction. So if people are getting more concentrated noise over their communities right now, it could be because of the construction. So they might have to go back to last spring to make sure they are aware of the normal flow of our airport. And the weather is our major driving factor with which runways we're using. For safety, the planes need to take off and land into the wind. And so there could be days where we're not turning right over Lake Nokomis every day because the winds are out of the southeast. And so that is another reason why sometimes you might have more noise concentration over your area because of the wind direction that day or those few days.
Got it. Got it. Okay, folks, we're heading into the end of our session here today. I've got one last question for each of my panelists, and then we'll wrap up things for our session. I want to go around to each of you. I'm going to go around to each of you and ask, how did you collaborate? How do you collaborate and work with all of the stakeholders involved in this initiative? And let me go to Michelle first for a MAC perspective.
So for this initiative, in this particular process, the role of the MAC has really been to provide the input to the FAA regarding the unique aspects of our airport and our surrounding communities, and to connect the FAA with our MSP stakeholders like the Noise Oversight Committee. And the Noise Oversight Committee had that initial opportunity to provide feedback to the FAA. And their feedback really focused on dispersing aircraft, minimizing the concentration of flight paths, and communicating the project impacts to the public. And I'll just say too that at the MAC, we collaborate and work with our stakeholders every day. And we do this because we really want to be a good partner and a good neighbor in this community. And so it's now the public's opportunity to provide their feedback. The comment period is open, and we encourage all of you watching and living around the airport to submit your comments to the FAA.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. Let me go to Christy next. From an environmental perspective, can you talk about your collaboration?
Sure. From my NEPA perspective, being part of the work group early on, I was able to understand the purpose and need of this project. And then working with the MAC, I can understand the local concerns, so we can incorporate that into our analysis. And now I continue to work with our subject matter experts in our data collection and analysis of the project.
Very good. Thank you, Christy. Now to our air traffic folks. First, let's go to Matt, then Brian, and then Sean. So Matt, your perspective?
Oh, yeah, we've been doing this for over a year now, and our collaboration from the air traffic side is always safety. Safety is our #1 priority. And so we collaborate a lot with our friends in the tower. We talk to the tower about how we're going to get through these procedures to keep them as efficient and safe as possible. And then we also talk with Delta specifically to make sure that these procedures can be followed safely. And so every day safety is our top priority. And just like most of these people on the panel, we all live in the area. So we know how this can affect certain parts of the airspace. And we're always thinking about collaborating to make sure this is the best thing we can put out.
Great. Brian?
We have really long-standing relationships with both the MAC and Delta. So it was really no surprise that right from our first meeting, everybody was really open and honest with all the concerns. For the community, for industry, we were able to have good conversations about what we'd like to see from air traffic. So that those conversations were just kind of natural based on the relationships that we've had. And it's been a pretty collaborative process the whole way through.
Fantastic. Sean, what would you add to that?
Well, Eric, I said it before earlier, we operate the safest and most efficient aerospace system in the world. And collaboration really is the key to how we get there. We include all parties at the, pre-decisional level, bring them in, try to find out what their interests are. And then we look at commonalities amongst those interests so that we can reach consensus and build that better product that we're able to provide. Specifically with my role, I deal with different stakeholders on a day-to-day basis, be it airlines, military, our airports, including the MAC. I deliver policy and procedure, informational sessions to the Noise Oversight Committee to help, advance the information in a transparent manner to our community members. And so that's a role that I will continue to play as we go forward in the implementation of these procedures.
All right, great insight, Sean. We've heard from the MAC and we've heard from a number of FAA experts. Captain Sato, from an industry perspective, give us your thoughts on collaboration and what that's looked like throughout this project.
These projects are always, to me, a lot of fun, and I feel really honored to be a part of it. When we start these things, if you can imagine like that scene from Apollo 13 where, they give them a problem of you've got 13 amps and you got to get these astronauts back on planet Earth. That's kind of where we start from, is we've got this big problem and how do we come to a solution? And we have a lot of experts in the room. We have air traffic control experts, we have airport management experts, we have airline experts, but no one is an expert in everything. So, it takes everybody to do this. It's unbelievable the amount of man hours and the amount of time that has been invested in things like this. This airspace redesign has had a lot of people involved over the course of the last 18 months. So there's been an incredible amount of collaboration between all parties, including the community. So I'm really proud of what we've achieved, and I think that hopefully the product is something that will make everybody happy here. I think, ultimately what our goal is to make, Minneapolis-St. Paul one of the greatest airports in the world, and to do it while being great neighbors and stewards with the people in Minnesota.
Thank you, Captain Sato. The FAA Administrator, Mike Whitaker, has been quoted as saying that safety is a team sport. Well, collaboration, by its very nature, is also a team sport. And from my perspective, the collaboration within the FAA, within our organizational areas of expertise, with the MAC and with the NOC and with the industry, has been extremely important to move this project forward. But it's not only the collaboration with all those folks that I just named, it's also the collaboration with all of you that are tuning in live to listen to this or watching this as a recording. We are very much interested in your feedback and your comments. And as we close out the session, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can do that. So we're at the end of the workshop. Thank you for attending. Thank you to my subject matter experts on the panel for a lot of great answers to a lot of really, really insightful questions. We heard a lot of great ones, and I hope that our answers were informative. As I've mentioned several times, if you want to review the workshop again, please visit the FAA's YouTube channel. We also want you to know that you may submit a formal comment on the proposal. Simply scan the QR code that's on your screen, and we'll take you to an email associated with this proposal. Or if you'd prefer, there's a mailing address, and you can mail your comments to us. Please note that all comments must be received by September 15th, 2024. So once again, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our subject matter experts for providing their expertise. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and spending some of your time this afternoon with us. We'll have one more workshop tomorrow at 6 p.m. Central. Remember, this workshop is recorded, said it several times, and that recording, all the slides, all the addresses here on the screen, and the QR code will be available on YouTube right after we conclude today. Thanks again for joining us, and we wish you a good rest of your day.